we have some new feature for our builder that I want to capture so that when I share these recorded sessions, we have the most up-to-date information. Since we have something new, I'll do a new recording this time. And I'll send you all the link to be able to access this recording and any other recordings of trainings to share with your colleagues or to reference later, as we are going to cover a lot in this introduction to the form builder. So you may want to be able to reference some of the things that we've talked about. So today, we're going to be creating a new form, creating the layout, outlining the workflow, and then I say all the rest. The bulk of the work is in that layout and workflow, but I want to touch on all of the other areas that Droplet can optimize your processes as we get towards the end, but again, we'll be spending a lot of time in this layout and this workflow. My name is Shanna. I am the Customer Education Manager here at Droplet. If you haven't seen me before, it's very nice to meet you. I run these trainings monthly. We do have a rotating training that will change every month, but the bulk of these trainings are our Submission Manager, our Platform Admin, and this Form Builder training. And then hopefully, as you're building forms, you'll also get to see me in our open office hours. These are sessions that are available for you to get one-on-one support as you're building forms from me and some other implementation consultants. So let's get started. I'm going to be adding some links here in the chat. These are going to be helpful references for you. So I've got our Calendly link to be able to sign up for open office hours, our support email, and then our main category of form builder documentation for you to be able to search for anything that you might need there. As we get started here, I'm going to throw in this poll that I want you all to participate in, because this kind of determines which way we want to go. If you want to see building a form from scratch, or as you can see in this picture here, generating the layout from PDF or image, which is an option. So please put your answer here, and I will go with the majority. So if you would like to see us build a form from scratch or a PDF, put your answer in there. Okay, we're getting some answers. Perfect. We're still waiting on a few people, but so far everybody wants to see it built from scratch. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Thank you everybody for participating. Let's get started building from scratch. Before we even get into jumping into building things, you need to know that you need certain permissions to be able to access the form builder. This is something that we offer to all organizations to be able to build and edit their forms, but you may, within your organization, want to limit that to only a few people. So this builder button will only be available to those that have the permission to be able to build. If you do need some builder permissions for your account, feel free to drop your name and organization into the chat, and I can update those permissions for you after this session is over. Feel free to put any questions into the chat as well. I'll be checking there, or if you want to unmute yourself, your questions are probably applicable to everybody here. So don't be shy. Let's work together and build out a form. So the first thing we want to do when we're building a form is navigate to this forms page within Droplet. And from here, you should be able to see all of the forms that you have, depending on the view that you show. So this is showing all of the active forms that I have in this organization. And then some additional buttons here. We will ignore this import button for now, but importing allows you to maybe like duplicate forms, or using our template library, our team can import a template into your organization so that you don't have to start from scratch all the time. So if there are templates that you're interested in, I can throw that link into the chat as well. Okay, so we are going to click this plus form button here to create a form, and we can name it. I am going to be building out an application form. So I'm going to call this Droplet Community Schools Application. And I do this training a bit, so I'm going to put in just today's date to give it a different title. We can't have the same title for forms within your organization. They all need to have different titles. And then a quick description. Application for schools. And we won't be generating from a PDF or an image here, so we're going to skip over that. This sign-in required to view provides an authentication block to access the form. So if you have maybe reimbursement forms, we see that for more often than others. If you toggle this on, anybody trying to access that form will be prompted to sign in with Droplet. And once they're logged in, they will be able to access the form. Same with this other toggle here. Instead of accessing, this will be a restriction on submitting, so they need to be logged in order to submit, which is a good option for forms that you only want to be internally used within your organization. In this example, we want this to be filled out by anybody. So I'm going to create the form here, and this will open up our builder. And since we are starting from scratch, it is very bare here, except for these two fields, which I'll get into in a minute. I want to give you some idea on how to navigate. So we call this the form overview bar. It'll tell you the name of your form. If you have a published version or multiple drafts, they will show up here when you click in. So if you are testing out different looks that you want to demonstrate to your teams, maybe you have a couple drafts, or if you've published and you need to make changes, you'll see different versions of those published versions. And you have the ability to create a draft based on whatever is selected here. So if I have a published version that I want to duplicate and then make edits to, that would be that new draft button here. Then we have different layers that we can navigate to here. So the form, which includes all of the layout for what they will see, and maybe if you have formulas going in the background, that will show up in our canvas. We can see that all of the changes I have made are saved. Droplet does not do auto save because we do a lot of error checking. So we manually save so that you're not getting errors every time you attempt to save, every time it attempts to save automatically. And then we have the button to be able to publish the form. So once you feel that it is in a good spot and you want to start testing, taking submissions, you would want to publish this here. This toggle will take you to our code view. We work in React and JavaScript. So if you're comfortable with those coding languages, you can work in inside our code editor and access all of the available tabs here. And then we have a 3-dot menu that offers several other options, as well as access to your profile here. Inside of this left panel, you can see 2 tabs. So one is for building, where I'm able to drag and drop any field types over onto the canvas, and our visibility, which we consider our workflow visibility. So when a form goes to an admin or some approver, if that's a part of your workflow, what are they able to see and what are they able to edit will be determined within this layer. And we will get to that as we start to build out our workflow. You have a list of all of the components available to you. They're broken out by types. So these are interactive components. Then we have visual components here, and then our more complex advanced components down here. At the bottom, you can raise this up and lower it. This is a navigation tree where you can, if you have a very long form, instead of scrolling, you can find the section and the fields you want to edit within this navigation tree. You have the ability to change your view on this as well. If that hover would go away, I can adjust how this moves into the workflow or the form canvas. If you hover over any of these field types, you will be able to get a brief description of what they are, and then there's a link to be able to learn more about that component type. And then on the right-hand panel, we have our properties. So any selected field on your form will open up this properties panel where you're able to change any of this information. The properties available will be different depending on the field type that you are using. Okay, so inside of this workflow canvas, every time you are creating a new form, anytime you're editing a new form, these two fields will need to be here. At the very bottom, you'll see an ID in this properties panel. This submitted by name and this submitted by email are important when we are taking submissions. So if you do not have those, you'll get an error when you try to save saying that they aren't a part of your form. If they are set up using, you can get creative if you want an anonymous form and put in some dummy information in there. If it's not set up correctly, it won't be able to take submissions. So you do have the ability to change this label. So if you don't want it to say submitted by name, you can say something like applicant name and applicant email. So the person that is filling out this form is the applicant in this case. Once we take submissions, that submitter name and email will be used to, let's see, to give us that submitted by information so we can see who and what email was used to submit this form. Okay, so let's get started building this out. I often like to use an image, and I'm going to grab my file. I didn't do it quite right. So I wanted to drag and drop that in here for my image. And this is just going to be my Droplet Community Schools logo. Within here, I want to change the width. We consider the full canvas, the full left to right width to be separated into what we kind of consider 12 columns. You can adjust that so that they line up well here. I can change that to be a 3 width of columns. I can adjust the alignment of this and the size if I want it to be 100%, which looks a lot better here. And then I'm going to want to add in some text, and which will give us, let me grab, okay, I'm opening up my my PDF so I can see what I should be filling out here. So I'll put up here Droplet Community Schools, give it a nice looking header, might put our address on here. I'm going to adjust, as you can see, you can adjust a lot of the text properties. So giving it color, changing the alignment. If I wanted to add a link to either a PDF or another website, I can put the link in here. I can highlight part of the text and change the size. Might bold that. I might give myself another space there. And you can really play with how this looks. Often for a header, I use a divider here. And I can change the color of the divider to be one of my colors for my school. Give it a nice look. That's a great way to customize your forms, make them look nice. So now I want to add in the fields that we need. So first we'll have an area where I'm getting all of the applicant information. So I want their name and email. I also want their address. So I'm going to put in a line for address. Maybe I don't need it that big. City. Something that we often do is a drop down for the state. And then I might want to add in another input here for the zip code. When you're adding a drop down, you will need to specify the options available. You can do that in several different ways, a list, logic, or key value. You can learn more about that by hovering over this drop down and selecting learn more. We have those different options listed out here. So here I can put, Alabama and list them out this way. Other information I might need is a phone number. And I do see the application I'm referencing still has home phone, cell phone. I'm just going to leave phone number because I think we are past that as a society. And there are different settings that I can add to our input fields. So I can change the type to be validating or not allowing anything other than text, email, or number if I want that, or I can change the formatting through what we call a mask. And this has a lot of pre-made, frequently used options here, like phone number, dollars with no cents, Social Security or the last four of your Social Security. And what this does is it will limit the user of this form to only be typing in numbers. And then once they type in the numbers, it will format it like a phone number. We often put a guide when we use a mask, which will show them what's expected. So they're not trying to type in the dash or the parentheses when it's not necessary when they're filling out this form. And something else we often do is add in a placeholder so they know what to expect as far as formatting. Many people use these masks for account codes, other type of codes that have a very specific format so that people aren't messing up that formatting. And something that we want to do and that I've been forgetting to do is update these IDs. Every time that you add in a field onto your canvas, it's going to give a unique ID here, but it's not descriptive. So input 4 tells me nothing about what I would be expecting here. I want to update these because when you are referencing fields for calculations or Other areas of the form, you'll want to know what you're referencing instead of putting input for and just knowing that that's phone number. It's a lot easier to put in phone number here. This ID cannot accept spaces, so we often use camel casing, which is to lowercase the first letter of the first word and then do a capital letter for the first letter of the second word. So it's easy to read and you're able to understand that. And you'll want to change that for all of these. Zip code down here, state, city, address, and such. Okay. And I'm going to add in a couple more things here before we move on to the workflow editor. I'm not going to build out the entirety of the form because we just don't have that time, and I'm not sure you want to watch me just add fields over here, but I want to show you some important things. A radio button is another way to use options to give the user options that they select, but the radio will be only able to select one option. Drop down has the ability for multiple or only one, selecting one option, and then check boxes allows users to select multiple options. So if in this case, what I'm wanting to demonstrate requires either one answer or the other, which will determine if something else is visible. So this is, are you currently employed by Droplet Community Schools? And the only two options I want available are this yes and no. And I'm going to adjust this to be horizontal, give it a little more space so it's not all stuck there. Changing the name of this to currently employed. And I'll save that. And then I have a field that will be based on what is selected here. So if they are currently employed by Droplet Schools, I want to know the years employed. And this, I just want to accept a number. And again, changing those IDs, that is helpful in the long run. And then I want to adjust the display logic because this isn't applicable to every single person, but I want it to be required if they do say yes. So I don't want to just toggle this off and say, no, it's not required at all. And hopefully they'll fill it out if they are employed. But we do have the option to hide this field so that's not even seen by the user unless they are selecting yes here. So we open up our display logic. This will give you a place to write an expression. And an expression is something that either evaluates to be true or false. And if it is true, because this is display logic, that field will display. If it is false, it won't display. So we called that last one currently employed, and that's how we reference it. Because you can have the same label. I could use that, are you currently employed at Droplet Community Schools, on multiple fields if I wanted to, but that ID is always unique, and that's why we always reference that when we are using logic. So if currently employed is equal to yes. So this triple equals just means a definite equals. And that's the expression that we use. And I put this in quotes because the answer from that radio component is what we call a string. So it's text, which will be identified by those single quotes. And then the option is yes. And this is exact from the option that I had before. If I use a lowercase yes, computers need to be told very specifically. So this lowercase yes does not mean the same thing as a capital Y yes, because that wasn't an option. So it does need to be exact as you're working on this. Done. I'm going to save that. And then I want to show you how you can interact with the form and check to make sure things are working, and look at the form how other users would look at it. So from this 3-dot menu, I want to select debug here. In the debug view, I will be able to see what this looks like for the first person submitting this form. I can see that this does not look great, so I can change that. And then I see that field that we entered in that display logic for isn't showing. And I want to make sure that it's working. So if I select no, I expect it not to show up. But if I select yes, it should show up. And there it is. Another thing you can do within this view is to check which fields are required. If you remember, I can toggle this property of required on and off. Everything is required by default when you're adding in these different fields. So if you want fields to be optional, simply toggle that off. And if you forget or you want to keep checking as you're building along, you can click this submit button and it will show you what fields are required and kind of give you that experience. So you can be typing in as you were the applicant, skip over fields that you might not see as relevant, submit, and see how that would look for the people using your form. Down below, you'll see the data that is input into those fields and the ability to change where it is at in the workflow. So far, we only have the start step. And then we have completed and rejected steps, which are defaulted in our workflow. So there's not much to really play around with and see right on that front. Okay, last thing I want to do is this is what the applicant is filling out, but once the applicant has moved on, once the applicant has submitted the form, it's probably going to go to an HR person to review. And I'm going to want to give that HR person the ability to add in comments or something like that. So I'm going to add in a text area, this multi-line input, change this to comments. I'm going to let it be the full width here. Always updating those IDs. Once they enter in their comments, they'll maybe move it along or reject it, depending on if this applicant is a good fit. So they enter in their comments, and then maybe it moves to somebody to do the interview. So I might want to add in another place for interview comments. Anything that you might need on this form will need to go inside of this canvas for all the users. So considering more than just the person who's filling out the form initially, we need all of the inputs for every single part of the workflow step to be added in here. And I add them right before this action bar because this action bar will show up for every single workflow step. So adding it above that keeps the flow nice. It's not going to put a submit before their actual required actions. So I'm going to call this interview comments. If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me as I'm going along, or throw them into the chat and I will check that. Okay, so I have the fields that I want people to be filling out throughout the workflow. Now I want to add this workflow. Right now, This is called the workflow canvas. I can adjust my view, give myself a little more room to work here. If I zoom out, I can see 3 different steps, and these steps are clickable. You can click inside them, see the details. You also see the overview of everything right here. Connecting these 2 steps is this transition line. I can highlight that too if I need to delete it, and I just backspace or delete on my keyboard. Since this is not just going to go and be done as soon as they submit it, that might be true for like policy acknowledgements or other forms like that. But in this case, I want there to be steps between the start and completed. So I'm going to highlight this. That's no longer applicable. I don't want it to go straight to completed. I can add a step here by hovering over which transition I want it to be. So this check marks would be if it's submitted. The red would be if it's rejected. So in the case of submitting on the start step, there's no option to reject their submission before they even submit it. So I'm going to drag, click that plus once I hover, drag over, and it's going to give me a new step. I'm going to label this HR review. I can assign it straight from this view here. So maybe I want our Erin HR person to be the one responsible for reviewing all of the applications that are submitted. After Erin reviews it, they can either move it forward. So I'm dragging and dropping again to our interview step. And I will assign that to our superintendent. Or they can reject it. And I'd want it to go to this rejected step here. Which wouldn't be assigned to anybody because I just want that to have the status of rejected. We're done with that submission. But once it moves to the interview step, Marley superintendent is able to do the interview, write in their comments, and submit it. If it's approved, I want it to just go to completed. If your process is different, feel free to not follow what I'm doing here. This is purely an example. So I want it to move to completed. If I reject it after the interview, I want it to go to rejected status here. That's the end of that application. So that's how our workflow steps inside of these details. Once you click details, it opens up the form card information here. I can see the name of the step. I can see what status it is, in progress, completed, or rejected. In this case, it would be in progress, who it's assigned to here. This step run logic is the same process of adding the display logic. If I click in here, it's going to ask me for an expression. And if the expression is true, it will run on this step. If it's false, it would be this step would be skipped. And that's important for things like if you have purchase approvals and it needs to go to a person who will only be approving for purchases over $500 or over $1,000. In all other cases, it does not need to involve them. So I'd put in logic here that says if the amount is greater than 500, I want it to come to this step. Everything else will be skipped. You also have the ability to send this in different directions and then determine what those conditions would be. So if it's HR review and I want it to go to oh boy, hard to think on the spot. Move to the superintendent in this situation or the school's principal. If it's this type of position, then I can draw on here multiple pathways and then determine if it goes to this pathway or this pathway based on that logic. But I want to delete that. You also see the reject pathways, which can work the same way. Inside of this view, you also have the ability to send notifications. There are a couple different types of notifications. So this send to assignee is a default notification that is always sent anytime the workflow involves you and it's your turn to do your responsibilities for on that step. So once somebody submits, if I'm Erin HR, the application was submitted, I get an email saying this default information here so that I know to review that form. These can be edited here so they can be a little bit more customized, and I can say if I've tons of different forms that I'm getting notifications for, I might want this to be a little more specific and say, you know, Droplet, application to review as the subject. And then here is a link that I'd be able to just click on from my email, complete that task instead of logging back into Droplet and finding it. I can just do it straight from my email. So we have the assignment emails is what we call them, and you can customize those. And then we have other notifications. And this might be applicable if you want to update the submitter throughout the process of where their submission is, or if, say we hire this person, once it gets to the completed step, I want to notify payroll and some other departments so they can get started on the processes behind the scenes and give them access to all of the applicant information. So you're able to add notifications in that way. People that don't necessarily need to do anything on the form, but they do need to know about the form. Those would be included in these other notifications. And there's two different triggers. So one, when it comes into the step, that's when I send that notification, or when it leaves that step, that's when I send that notification. So I probably want to send a notification once this form has been rejected. Very like an automatic thing. Once it comes into this rejected status, I want to send this to the submitter. And I want it to say like, thank you for applying. This notification is always hard for me to do in these demonstrations because it's so hard to reject people on a personal level. So even writing this out is difficult for me. So hello, I can add in dynamic fields. So information within the form, I can put the submitter's first name here so that a little bit more customized. Thank you for your interest in working with we have, I'm just trying to make this quick too. We have decided to move forward with a different applicant. Please check our job postings and apply in the future. Something like that. I can throw in a link for the job postings right here so that they're able to click on that. I can do a sign off, I guess, best. Something like that. And then if I wanted to include the link to their application, I can do that with this dynamic field here and throw that link in. They'll be able to see everything on the form that they filled out. I can also do that notification here once it's completed to different payroll people, and I can select multiple people here. So if I had, you know, Lane as our payroll person and then Beckett teacher as an example, I can send the same one, or I can send different emails depending on the information that they might need. So that's how the workflow works and notifications work. Now that we have different steps in here, I want to kind of change what is seen at each step, because if we look here in our debug view, now that I'm refreshing, you can see they have the ability to see and edit this these two different comment sections. And that's not what I want their experience to be. So I can come and I can select from the canvas or from this navigation tree, the one I want to hide. So here I can see I have different columns here of editable, read only, and hidden. Read only means that you can see it, but you can't edit it. So on the start step, I don't want it to be editable or read only. I want it to be hidden. So I don't want the person who's submitting the application to be able to see those comments at all. And then I can make that editable on that HR review step. But I do want the interviewer to see those comments. So I'm going to leave that as read only. And then here, I want this hidden on the start step, hidden on the review step, because there won't be information there and they don't need to be confused about additional fields that are empty. But I do want it editable on this interview step. And that's how you update that workflow visibility. We can test that out again by going to this debug view. Real quickly, I want to show you that you can also edit what is visible on those notifications. So if I did send a rejection email with a link to their application, maybe I don't want them to see those comments. So I can hide this on that rejected notification. Same with this one, I can hide that. So they're not seeing these comments that we maybe only wanted to be internal. And I can save. It'll let me. Perfect. Okay, and then if I come back to this debug view and I refresh, now I'm seeing for the start step everything that I want them to be filling out. When I check on the interview step, I can see that they have access to see everything and edit those comments, make sure everything's working properly in that debug view. Okay, so that's a lot of information. I did want to demonstrate quickly a new feature, and that is this test workflow feature, or sorry, this translations feature. This is brand new to our visual builder, but a lot of you may need to be having multiple, or maybe your process has been to have multiple versions of the same form in different languages. Now we can have one form and people can select their language, and based on the selection, they'll be able to read it in their preferred language. This is using Google Translate, so you can triple check those translations, but they should be pretty accurate. You can type the language in here. I think a common one that we often see is Spanish. Here I am adding in this new language. It is going to grab each of the fields from the form and give it a okay, and give it the ability to be edited, all of this text. So since this is just an address, I probably don't need to translate that. It did translate this Droplet Community Schools into Spanish. You can check, it translated all of my labels for these different fields. So I can see the applicant email, and I can check all of these different text. I can add in additional text here. And I can save that. Something that I will want to do within the form is now I want to add in a language component here. So I want them to be able to select their language. So kind of want this to be lined up. So I am going to, within this section, or I probably just want this at the very top. They can select their language here. I can adjust where I want this oriented on the page, aligned on the page. And if I save that, and I refresh on this preview, I can now change the language. And this is giving me a bunch of different languages. So let me go back into my settings for this. I don't want it to include all languages. I just want it to include Spanish. Now I'm refreshing. And they can choose to select Spanish, which is the only option now. So if they select Spanish, it's over, but I can add in English so they can toggle back and forth if they want to. So that's how you add in this translation feature, which is really awesome. Our engineering team worked hard on that, and it makes this process of translations so much faster, so much easier for you all to do. And that should cover about everything that I wanted to cover in this introduction to the form builder. If you have questions, please feel free to unmute yourself. I can stop this recording now.